I thought you made a good point. I listen, to be clear, I thought
thank you for acknowledging.
Your response was very good. You said that Trump did the same thing with the pens, and that he pardoned all the January 6th people.
On the most recent episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored, the deck was predictably stacked against Morgan's lone liberal guest, the fierce Julie Roginsky. But despite that fact, Roginsky humiliated Trump in front of her 3 MAGA co-guests and even forced Piers Morgan to admit in front of those MAGA guests that Donald Trump screwed up by pardoning the violent January 6th insurrectionist. It was glorious. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we got several clips to play from the most recent episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored. Julie Roginsky is a former Fox News contributor. I think she's now on CNN, if I'm not mistaken. She's been on Morgan's show before. And again, outnumbered 4-1. Piers is respectful towards her, but again, asking her largely adversarial questions. And despite that, she is more than a match for all of her MAGA opponents. And we're going to play these clips and unpack them together, starting with this one, in which she calls out MAGA comic Dave Smith for his supposed concerns about presidential pardons.
Well, first of all, I appreciate that Dave is going after Fauci and relitigating 2024. Let's talk about the fact that President Trump used an Autopen to sign all of the pardons for the January 6th insurrectionists who literally assaulted our Capitol and the seat of our democracy. So if you want to talk about that, is President Trump not compos mentis to sign them himself? That he used an Autopen to I don't blame him for not wanting to sign his own signature to pardoning insurrectionists, but that's exactly what he didn't do. So let's look at this from a really realistic perspective. There's nothing in the Constitution that has the Autopen exclusion. And President Biden is still very much alive to tell us that he, in fact, wanted and did pardon the people that he pardoned. So this whole thing is crazy. It's done to rile up the base. It's done to tie up the courts. I'm sure the Supreme Court, even the Supreme Court, is going to say this is ridiculous because Autopens have been used consistently in signing documents over and over and over again in this administration, in the previous administration, in the first Trump administration. So there's no Autopen exclusion to the United States Constitution. But
so damn good. Actually, we're going to finish, I guess, this clip out. It's about another 30 seconds, then go on to the next one, and we'll give my thoughts.
I understand why Dave wants to talk about Anthony Fauci. He wants to talk about anything other than the fact that, of course, this president, the one we have right now, pardoned January 6th insurrectionists, and you have the temerity after that to talk about Anthony Fauci, who I think did the best he could.
So what they're talking about, Dave Smith is like freaking out over President Biden's preemptive pardon of Dr. Anthony Fauci because, of course, Fauci was being targeted by Trump loyalists. This idea that he was somehow, engaged some sort of crime with respect to COVID, right? Donald Trump promised retribution against his political opponents. He counts Fauci among them. So President Biden preemptively pardoned Fauci, who served under Donald Trump as well as other Republican presidents in a bipartisan fashion for years. So Roginsky's right to say, listen, if you're freaking out about preemptive pardons, what Donald Trump did with the violent January 6th insurrectionists is objectively far worse. You have no evidence that Fauci committed an actual crime. And so, yeah, whatever you want to complain about Biden, Trump is objectively worse, which is usually the case. And I love the fact that she brought up that Trump has used Autopens, both to sign executive orders and pardons, because he signed an executive order personally with a wet pen about the executive order about the January 6th pardons, but each pardon for each defendant has to be individually signed, right? So you're talking about 1,500 pardons, which were issued or rather signed via Autopen. So given this controversy about, oh my God, Biden didn't use a wet pen in order to sign the preemptive pardons for, Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney and all the January 6th House Select Committee, personnel. Well, again, if that's the case, then what Donald Trump has done with Autopens with respect to executive orders and pardons are also invalid. And of course, these MAGA losers can't grasp and grapple with that fact. We'll move on to the next clip.
With the Chinese.
Do you know what I love about this whole discussion? That you want to have a conversation about pardons and you'd rather focus on Anthony Fauci. And not once did you mention anything about what I said about the January 6th insurrectionists. Apparently, we could just put that aside.
I thought you made a good point. No, hang on. I thought you made a good point.
Then why are we talking about Anthony Fauci? Listen,
I thought you made a good point. Listen, to be clear, I thought
thank you for acknowledging.
Your response was very good. You said that Trump did the same thing with the pens, and that he pardoned all the January 6th people. I've said this regularly on the show. I do not think any of the ones on January the 6th who committed acts of violence should have got pardons, particularly against police officers who the Republican Party has always said should be the most protected people out there. So I don't understand why that happened. It was wrong. So just to be clear, that's my position on it. But I also think...
So again, extracting this public concession from Piers Morgan against Donald Trump and in front of three diehard Trump loyalists, Dave Smith, Batya Ungar-Sargon, and Riley Gaines. I love it. It's good to see. Roginsky did a really, really good job here. And we're going to play another clip as well, but it's just so important. Now, the idea of the rhetorical question at the end, I don't know why he did that. Well, he did that, Piers, because he loves political violence. Trump loves political violence when it's his supporters engaging in active violence on his behalf. That's why he sat on his fat orange ass for 3 hours and watched the insurrection unfold. Even though as president of the United States, he had the highest constitutional obligation and the greatest level of constitutional power to quell, to crush that insurrection the way that an actual patriotic president like President Washington or President Lincoln would have done. That's why he did what he did, Piers. It's not exactly particularly mysterious. Here's another clip.
I think Donald, I don't think...
Go on.
Listen, I don't think Donald Trump is particularly mentally well. You may agree with me or disagree with me on that.
I couldn't
think
disagree
Donald Trump
more. Trump to me is exactly
okay,
the same.
Well, I'm glad.
Well, he's exactly the same. You may not like it.
But
you may not like it, but he's not. He's exactly
No.
the same Donald Trump I've known for 20 years. Honestly, it's like
Okay,
like the same guy I met on day one.
Well, he's a bit different than the guy that I used to know when I used to be at Fox News all the time.
Really?
So let me tell you, I
Why
think
is he
he's gone
different?
a little bit off the Yes, he is.
Why?
Because he is. He just is.
Tell me.
Because he's not with it the way he used to be. He's
In
just
what way?
not with it the way he used to be. But wait. Okay, I'm sorry. Am I diagnosing like psychiatrist here? I'm telling you right now.
You're the one
man who
making the
I see on TV
allegation.
right
I've
now
seen
is
no
not the man-
evidence he's not with it
is
at
not-
all.
Okay, listen, Piers. Here's the problem. The problem is that you guys would rather talk about Joe Biden, who has
You just
left
said
the
Donald
scene
Trump is
effectively,
mentally
and talk-
unwell.
and
I'm just
talk-
saying, what's the evidence?
Yes.
The guy
yes,
is 78
yes,
years old. He still does 2-hour.
I think somebody.
He does 2-hour press conferences. He does 2-hour rallies. He does endless off-the-cuff media encounters, way more than any of his predecessors. For a guy who's got mental problems, that's pretty bold.
That doesn't actually prove anything. No one's saying that Donald Trump lacks the ability to make mouth noises, right? Yes, he can go and speak often incoherently and tell lies to an unprecedented degree for an extraordinary amount of time when you consider his age. That's not what we're talking about. She said that he's not mentally well, which is true. Donald Trump's verbal agility has diminished. His vocabulary has diminished compared to where it was 15 years ago, 25 years ago, et cetera, and so forth. Go back and watch interviews with Donald Trump back in the 80s with Larry King or the 1999 on Conan O'Brien. You will see a regression in terms of Donald Trump's cognitive and verbal ability. As a matter of fact, again, we saw during the 2024 election that in poll after poll after poll, Americans were concerned about his mental fitness compared to Vice President Kamala Harris. So Piers, of course, he's a deep friend of Donald Trump. He's loyal to Donald Trump for personal or political reasons, but there's no question that Donald Trump is not the peak of his mental agility, and just saying, well, he can say words for long periods of time. He's usually reading off a teleprompter, and then when he deviates from the teleprompter to speak extemporaneously, it's usually terrible, atrocious, lie-filled, and disastrous, often incoherent. He refers to it as the weave. It's the weave. No, it's just you spouting off non sequiturs and sentence fragments until you finally, get nudged back onto the particular trajectory you were supposed to be on in the first place. Again, this is not proof of Donald Trump's mental fitness, but I digress.
I don't think that, yes, just because he's able to have the stamina to do that does not mean that he comports himself as somebody who is mentally well. You and I can agree or disagree on that. The truth of the matter is that you guys would much rather talk about Anthony Fauci, you'd much rather talk about Joe Biden than you talk about what's going on right now, which is that our economy is in the toilet, that Donald Trump has handed over Ukraine to his friend Vladimir Putin, that you showed a clip of the Speaker of the House talking about how he could not believe that Joe Biden cut off LNG exports, which would only help Russia. Well, what else is helping Russia right now? What Mike Johnson is allowing Donald Trump to do, which is to effectively sell Ukraine out to the Kremlin. You guys would rather talk about any of this. You'd rather talk about ancient history
he hasn't
from
done
last
anything
year.
of the sort yet.
He hasn't.
Except all the pressure has been on Ukraine and not on Russia. So no, I'm not sure what Piers is talking about here. Again, this idea, okay, sure, it all looks bad what Donald Trump is saying and what he's doing, but he's going to pull a rabbit out of a hat. And that sounds more like an article of religious faith than an actual, astute political analysis here. And again, he's offered nothing of substance to corroborate the claim that he's going to bring Russia to heel somehow in favor of Ukraine or on, to Ukraine's benefit. Everything that Trump has done thus far has been to Ukraine's disadvantage in the conflict with Russia. But I digress. Here's another clip.
To Julie, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Was that? Sorry. I wasn't sure.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't disagree with you. No, I don't disagree with you, Piers. I think the Democratic Party has no message. I think the Democratic Party has no messenger. I'm disgusted with what Chuck Schumer did. I'm disgusted with what Chuck Schumer said in the New York Times this weekend about what he did and why he did it. I agree that the Democratic Party is at the lowest point in modern history of its approval ratings. And the reason for that is a lot of Democrats like me are disgusted with the leadership of the Democratic Party. So you're not going to get an argument from me about any of that. I would also caution to say that Donald Trump's approval ratings also stink. And so it's not like the American people are enamored with either party right now. But yes, the Democrats have a tremendous, that's not to diminish from the fact that the Democrats have a tremendous amount of rebuilding to do. The Democrats, I think, don't know how to fight. The Democrats certainly don't know how to message. And I agree with you that the Democrats don't know how to make the American people believe that.
So we're going to play one more clip in a moment. But of course, this is when the topic turns to right now what Chuck Schumer is facing, the Democratic leader in the Senate, for his capitulation to Trump. He and 9 other Democrats agreed to back a so-called continuing resolution, which is a misnomer because continuing resolutions keep the funding levels the same from the previous, either the previous budget or the previous continuing resolution. This one makes pretty substantial changes, not just in terms of the finance or the funding angle, but also in terms of like the law. So again, it capitulates. It effectively prevents the House from even having a vote on whether to end Donald Trump's state of emergency, which he's using as a predicate to launch these tariffs, okay? Typically speaking, the House reserves that power under any president. The president declares a state of emergency, Democrat or Republican. Congress can vote to override it and end that state of emergency. And this Republican-led House, in this continuing resolution, forfeited that power so as to not be tempted to use it against Trump. Just a total capitulation, among other things. But she's right to be calling out Chuck Schumer for this. More people should do it as well, quite frankly. I think Chuck Schumer, I'm sure he's a nice guy. I'm sure he meant well. I'm sure he actually genuinely believed that what he did was right, but it's not what his base wants. It's not what his colleagues want. And the fact of the matter is we need a fighter, and Chuck Schumer is not that. Here's one last clip on that subject.
What was interesting, I mean, Schumer, I think, took a pragmatic view, which he articulated by saying that a government shutdown would have been a far worse option than passing the GOP's spending bill. And that once it's shut down, Trump, Musk, and the others would have free rein to do what the hell they liked until it got reopened. I understood that argument. It was a pragmatic answer, but I also could see the fury from his own party members. How did you feel about it?
I was furious, and I will tell you that, of course, the minute that bill was signed, that continuing resolution was passed, Donald Trump ignored what was in it and decided to sequester money that Congress had already appropriated. So, look, it's not like you're going to ever be able to work with Donald Trump if you're a Democrat. Donald Trump is on a grievance-filled rage to pay back the people that he thinks tried to put him in prison, and therefore he will not work with Chuck Schumer. He will not work with the House Democrats. He will not work with Senate Democrats. He is not somebody who is going to have a kumbaya bipartisan moment. And the minute that Chuck Schumer realizes that there is no working with Donald Trump, there is no working with Senate Republicans and House Republicans who are basically handmaidens to Donald Trump, who've given up their own co-equal branch of government responsibilities to do whatever the president wants, the minute they can start standing up for the other 50% of this country who doesn't agree with Donald Trump.
Love it. Agreed with everything she said. Listen, I am currently as disillusioned with the Democratic Party as I've ever been. Listen, I often fight the urge and have done so successfully, the way that more progressive people, more leftist people than myself do when it comes to the Democratic Party. I think you have to tolerate some concessions, some compromises in terms of both policy and strategy. But we've actually tolerated that so much along the way. And the trade-off, the deal was, listen, we have to compromise on policy and strategy from time to time in order to mount a more effective opposition against Donald Trump. And then when the moment comes and you're supposed to mount an effective opposition to Donald Trump, you refuse to do so, you have failed. And that means that all the other compromises and frustrations we've tolerated along the way have meant exactly nothing. This was Chuck Schumer's one moment, because the next time the budget comes up, it's going to be passed on reconciliation, which means Republicans won't need to negotiate with Democrats because they can pass it with a simple majority. This was the one moment where we could apply leverage. And Chuck Schumer has sent the signal to Republicans in the future that if you ever need Democratic votes, or if you're worried rather about a Democratic filibuster, you need only wait Chuck Schumer out, because he will ultimately bend the knee and do what's best for institutions rather than bring the fight and the fire that his base wants. So I agree he needs to go, and we need somebody like Chris Murphy or an AOC or a Bernie Sanders, somebody who has more fire and passion and willingness to double down and stick it to Trump and the Republicans. And Chuck Schumer's not it. So anyway, very, very great performance by Julie Roginsky on the front of domestic politics. Again, even forcing, once again, Piers Morgan to make an uncomfortable admission that Donald Trump did a very bad thing, not only on his show, which Trump might hear about, but in front of 3 of Donald Trump's biggest supporters who were, basically silenced by it, didn't speak up to defend Trump's January 6 pardons in any respect. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.